All right, guys, very excited to welcome back into the program Tej Seth from Penn Gaming. The last time he was with us, he was with Sumer Sports, so a little bit of change of role for him. We are sort of on the eve of football season, and so I thought it would be appropriate to bring in one of my great ball knowing friends, someone who knows. I guess Tej, you know the dots, you know ball, but you also know the dots, and you're here to teach. I have many questions. I'm very excited to learn. How are you feeling as we are just about a month away from the beginning of the 2024 NFL season?
Yeah, I'm feeling great. I'm really excited to be back on this show, Davis, and also just the fact that we have live football this Thursday. Like none of the starters will be playing on both teams, I assume, but just like the fact that you can like see these players go out onto the field and actually play is really exciting for me.
I mean, it's gonna be incredible. There are players to evaluate in all of these preseason
Mhm.
games. If you're a real football nerd, the beginning of preseason is a real remember that guy moment. You'll get to
Yeah.
see lots of guys that you watch play college football. I mean, I had that experience watching the UFL, the XFL, all of these leagues. Like I always really enjoyed that. And I sort of feel the storyline of this season. I think there are two things going on. So the first is, can anyone get close to the 49ers in the NFC? As of right now, we're recording this on July 31st. My answer is no. I think they're definitely kind of similar to last year. I think they're sort of in a stratosphere of their own. I don't think the same thing is true of the AFC. I think had the Bills not had an all-time weirdo season, had Todd Monken not lost his mind in the AFC Conference Championship game, had Joe Burrow stayed healthy, I think the AFC would have looked quite a bit different, and it all kind of benefited to the Chiefs. So let's start there. The biggest challenger to the Chiefs in the AFC, in your opinion, Bills, Bengals, Ravens, Jets, I guess, if you're a crazy person. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, this is really interesting to think about, and because the AFC is so competitive, and I think like if you look at the betting markets or maybe just power rankings in general, the common answer would be the Ravens. But I actually don't think the Ravens are the biggest challenge to the Chiefs in the AFC. I am going to go with the Bengals for a lot of the reasons that you just mentioned. I think that getting Joe Burrow back from injury is going to be crucial for them to have a top five, top eight pass offense, which they very well could with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins still there and still available. And I also think that the defense for the Bengals is due for some positive regression. I think that they were a defense that let up a lot of explosive plays last season. And we haven't really seen that from a Lou Anarumo defense the previous seasons before last. And I think that we should see more of a blend of what we saw last season and the previous seasons, and the Bengals can get back to kind of a league average or even better defense.
I mean, that I think actually is probably the thing that's going a little bit under discussed relative to the Bengals is, everyone kind of grants, okay, the Ravens have this great defense. They were actually incredible on defense last season, which is sort of why it wasn't weird that Lamar won MVP. I think Lamar was a deserving MVP winner, but he maybe didn't have the gaudy touchdown totals that you would expect because that defense was so phenomenal. Like just in the second half, a bunch of those games, they were just, handing the ball off to Justice Hill and Gus Edwards and saying, let's get out of here healthy. But the Lou Amorano defense, it was not last offseason, but the offseason before, people thought the Bengals were going to lose him because he was going to go be a head coach. People were
Mhm.
saying this defense is so good. How can they keep Lou Amorano when he has this crazy good defense? And they were fairly snake bitten on offense last year. I think getting anything out of a third wide receiver compared to what they got from Tyler Boyd the last two seasons, they've got Andre Yoshivas, who is kind of the darling of camp right now, and then they took Jermaine Burton in the third round. Burton, a pretty interesting guy, probably a first round pedigree if you look at like his high school stuff
Mhm.
and the teams that he played for, but he seems to not be that nice of a guy. I sort of feel that teams with three like high level pass catchers are just at such an advantage over the teams that have two. I mean, I think we'll see that. I think we definitely see that with the 49ers. I think the Vikings with when Hawkinson has been healthy versus when Hawkinson has not been healthy, I think are a great
Mhm.
example of that. I mean, the Chiefs last offseason with like zero point 0.5 solid pass catchers, depending on how healthy Travis Kelsey was, I think is evidence of that. I mean, and I always kind of think about this stuff too. Like the Bengals definitely would love to have Joe Burrow win an MVP. That always kind of weighs on me. Like they would love that as an organization. And I do wonder if we see, I mean, My hope as a fan is that it's enough of the two high safety. It's enough of forcing Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and Mahomes and Lamar to dink and dunk over the field. I want the return of deep passing.
Yeah, I am with you there. And I think that there is going to be a slight uptick in deep passing this season, especially early in the season for like a team like the Chiefs, where we're assuming Rashee Rice is suspended early in the season. And then you have Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy there to really stretch the field vertically. So because of that, like I can see the Chiefs throwing a lot more deep passes this year. I think, you also bring up the Bengals where they bring in Keon Coleman, and he can be someone that can win down the field. And while you have like Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel work underneath. So I'm also hoping that average depth of target increases. I want the explosive passing game back like it was in 2020 and 2021.
100%. And I hope it's leaning there. A lot of the teams are sort of speaking that way, where they were not doing that last offseason. Last offseason, I suppose the end of the 2022 season was kind of the two high safety apocalypse, where all these teams were playing it so short. A lot of what these offensive coordinators and quarterbacks have been talking about is a return to the deep passing game. I mean, the thing that is very exciting to me is actually I think the Chargers might do that a little bit. A lot of what's been coming out of Chargers training camp has been Justin Herbert, launching it deep too. Right now, DJ Shark, I think in the end it'll probably be Brendan Rice Jr. I mean, I think the AFC, it's so unbelievably competitive. Like if I like right now, it was one of the crazy things to me about Rodgers choosing to go to the Jets when he left Green Bay is like, why would you want to go play in the AFC where like
Yeah.
you might be a 12-win team and end up being the 5 seed and having to go on the road and play against Josh Allen or go on the road and play against Lamar Jackson. Whereas, I mean, Jared Goff leads the second best team in the NFC right now. I know that you are partial to the Detroit Lions, but like to me that's a much easier game. The Lions actually are a fairly fascinating team. They are doing the best to test the theory on what can you do with like a league average or slightly above league average quarterback. How much talent can you surround them with? And I suppose the 49ers are roughly doing the same thing, whereas the AFC teams are almost all buoyed by these superstar quarterbacks.
Right, exactly. I do think that there's like a disconnect between the quarterbacks that are really, really good and then the supporting casts around them in the NFC, where, you would say some combination of Dak Prescott, Jalen Hurts are like the top two quarterbacks in the NFC. Then you can start to get into like the Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff, Brock Purdy, like those types of quarterbacks. And like the last two, the Goff and Purdy type quarterbacks, they have the strong supporting casts and they have the really good play callers that have really helped them, get to the NFC Championship last year. Well, you have Dak and Hurts who are very capable of playing at a high level, but might not have the supporting cast from well, for Hurts, it was defense last year. For Dak, I think it was secondary pass catching weapons outside of CeeDee Lamb, like you brought up earlier. So it's interesting to watch kind of like the pull and push and pull between the elite quarterbacks and the supporting cast and play calling.
Well, and Hurts is, I mean, I'm a big Jalen Hurts bull. People can see the University of Oklahoma helmet behind me. I love Jalen Hurts. I think he's a tremendous player. The thing that's so interesting about him, and this is true of Lamar, but I suppose we haven't seen it with Lamar, is that he's so sensitive to health. Like, to my knowledge, I don't think Lamar has had a knee or an ankle thing that he's had to play through in the NFL. I mean, it's possible someone could pull up a stretch where he did and he wasn't very good. But Hurts' knee last year was such a problem, and it impacted his ability as a rusher, not in the short yardage, but in open field. And he just could not drive off his leg on these throws. Like, there was such a drop off in the production for AJ Brown in the second half of the season versus the first half of the season. And, I suppose an argument for the Jared Goff, the Matt Stafford, the Phillip Rivers, the style of statuesque pocket passer is, those dudes can kind of roughly approximate their same performance if they're not getting out of the pocket all the time. And that's just not true for, I mean, even for like a Josh Allen style guy. If Josh Allen had to play through a strained MCL, his performance would really tail off. But this does lead me. I'm surprised this discourse has not been louder. I've seen it a little bit, but we are nearing the 49ers having to make a decision on what they want to pay one Mr. Brock Purdy. We did see Tua get a big deal We saw Jordan Love get a big deal, and it sort of brought about this idea of eventually, I don't know how soon it's going to be, but eventually, Tej, one of these teams is going to say, we are actually not going to pay the 13th best quarterback in the NFL the contract that he wants, and we are going to let another team do it. We're going to let him go to unrestricted or restricted free agency, let another team make the offer, and actually call us on our bluff. We can do two parts of this discourse. I would not have paid Tua that contract. I really would not have. I would have said, we can play this season. If we win a Super Bowl, if we make it to the AFC Conference Championship, we can renegotiate. We can, or maybe you can tell us to fuck off at that point and say, I actually, like, I don't appreciate what you did to me. I'd rather go play elsewhere. But Tua is the first time it's been done where I would not have signed the deal. And I think the same with Purdy. I do not think Purdy should get $250 million or whatever he's about to get from the 49ers. Where do you stand on Purdy? We'll do Purdy first.
Yeah. So when it comes to the Purdy contract, like you laid it out, very nicely with like these, if you're a top 14 quarterback in the NFL, it's just been status quo to give a market resetting extension to these quarterbacks. I think the thing that we need to remember about Brock Purdy is last season was still his first season as a full-time starter in the NFL. Like he's still, relatively like such a low sample size of starts. And I think he's almost become a little bit underrated in terms of public discourse at this point. I don't think he's a bona fide top 10 quarterback. I do think he could become a top 10 quarterback eventually because of some of the things he does that is better than the other quarterbacks that have played in the Shanahan 49ers offense, especially compared to Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, I think the main thing that Purdy does is like being able to get outside the pocket and still have a positive expected points added or EPA when, pressured and having to move outside the pocket, I think is something that was really impressive last year and something that was a lot better than what Jimmy G did in the same offense. And I think that if Purdy just keeps in continuing, and success isn't always linear or improvement isn't always linear, but there is stuff for him to improve on while keeping some of the other strengths the same. Like I think he can get into that borderline top 10 range and then be deserving of the contract that would be, above $60 million a year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not ruling it out. And, so much of it is, I suppose, been masked by the fact that he has probably the best play caller, play designer in the NFL as his head coach. Like, Andy Reid has gotten some great performances out of bad quarterbacks. We're definitely going to see it this year with Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota, like as he's part of that. We actually did this the other day. I looked into it to try and figure out what exact tree Kevin O'Connell is part of. He actually really only had 1 year or 2 years of overlap with McVay and Shanahan when they were all on that crazy Washington coaching staff, but it's the same basic offense. And I think in 2024, the Vikings will be a real test case because their quarterbacks are Sam Darnold, Nick Mullins, and JJ McCarthy. McCarthy probably the most raw first round quarterback. Lance was very raw, but I can't think of another guy who had, I think it's fewer than 700 dropbacks McCarthy had in college, which, you want to talk about small. Caleb Williams completed more passes than JJ McCarthy attempted in college, which is, it's fairly insane to think about. That's the sample that got McCarthy drafted 12th overall. The thing that I've always felt about Purdy, he did add a deep passing element that Jimmy never did in that offense. He's much more comfortable doing it. And I suppose we'll see, Brandon Ayuk has officially requested a trade. I think there's no chance that he gets traded. But I do wonder, if that's the thing that Purdy is able to duplicate this season, that he's able to have, completion percentage over expected, things like that, positive EPA on deep throws, then maybe I'll just end up with egg on my face. But I would, this is, to me, it's sort of the, I don't know how much you do basketball, but it's kind of the Draymond Green thing where I've always wondered, like, what would have happened if the Warriors actually did have a hard line at any point on Draymond and said, we're going to pay you like a really good fourth player, but we are not going to pay you like a superstar. And he would have said, you know what? No good for me. I want to go get the max from the Sacramento Kings or the Detroit Pistons. Like, what would Draymond Green have looked like being the superstar on a bad NBA team? Not great, probably. Can't really shoot. Not a great dribbler. He's a great playmaker, really good defender. And to me, Purdy is kind of Draymond, where no one would ever, or no one should ever question that Purdy kind of has, a preternatural ability to read the game. That's kind of what he offers, because he's not he's not one of these guys who has like the craziest arm or anything like that. But man, I just, as a 49ers fan, I would be incredibly nervous having seen, Jimmy Garoppolo make conference championship games and Super Bowls, have Nick Mullins averaging 8.5 YPA in this offense, CJ Beathard having a winning record as my quarterback, and knowing that the whole 49ers thing is predicated on having these offensive superstars at every position, and knowing you're going to lose a minimum of one of those guys. And with Kittle's 31 at the end of the season, maybe 2, McCaffrey's 29 after this season. Like, what did the 2025 49ers look like?
Yeah, that is a good point. Like, I do think that the 2025 49ers will take a step back because you have Trent Williams' retirement possibility, moving on from Debo or possibly Kittle or even McCaffrey, like you mentioned. Like, one of those three will probably not be in the picture after this season. So there's definitely regression, baked into that projection. But I still think, like, we were talking about how we think Shanahan is the best play designer, play caller in the NFL. When you have him as your play caller, paired with a certain type of quarterback, it gives you a floor on offense that is relatively high compared to other teams. But clearly there is a line for the 49ers, with what their quarterback can do, because they did not want to play Trey Lance. So there's definitely like a certain threshold that a quarterback has to hit to execute the Shanahan offense. I think Purdy is someone who can take it from top 5 offense to what it was last year, the number 1 offense in the league. And I think that it becomes a scarcity issue and an uncertainty issue for the 49ers if they move on from Purdy, where they don't want to get into another Lance situation where they have a quarterback that they don't know for sure can actually play and execute this offense that's so well designed. And I think that's probably what's going to lead them to end up paying Purdy is just like the going into the dark forest of just not knowing where you're going to get your next quarterback from.
That's the Trey Lance wrinkle. It's one of the biggest like what ifs wrinkle in time moments in NFL history. Like, what happens if Shanahan doesn't get bullied into taking Trey Lance when Mac Jones is really who he wanted all along? And then what happens if Purdy worked with this? I always forget the name of the trainer, but he worked with this trainer who like taught him all the terminology for the Shanahan offense, so that when Purdy met with Shanahan, he came away like super impressed. He knew all the plays. He was able to speak back. And by the way, this did also happen with Mahomes and Andy Reid as well, which is very funny. But yeah, I hadn't really came across that point of the 2025 49ers until right now. But Debo will be 29 or 30. Kittle will be 31. McCaffrey will be like well past the aging curve for a running back, and Brandon Ayuk will probably be on a different team. So that's a lot of responsibility to toss on the shoulders, I suppose, of Ricky Pearsall, which who I did not really like as a prospect, and I kind of thought was overdrafted. So maybe this is kind of the all-in year for the 49ers, and they're going to be feeling not great about it if they don't come away with the Lombardi this year.
Yeah, I do think that there's a lot of pressure on the 49ers to actually win the Super Bowl this year because of what you mentioned. I do still think Brandon Ayuk will be a 49er in 2025 and past that. Like you said, like, I don't think he gets traded this offseason. I assume that they'll extend him eventually, especially with like taking someone like Debo off the books. But yeah, the Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings, kind of receiver room after Ayuk there will be really interesting to see, how they kind of step up and take over some of the dynamic receiving ability that the others had before them.
Shout out to Ricky Pearsall, who was college teammates with Brandon Ayuk. That's interesting that you think Ayuk returns. What do you think the framework of that deal looks like? I suppose, are you thinking they move on from Debo and they choose to pay Ayuk instead?
That's exactly what I think is going to happen there. I think that Ayuk, should get around the Amon-Ra St. Brown contract. So like 30 and a half, $31 million a year in terms of APY. And then they can move on from Debo Samuel after this year to clear up some cap to be able to support that contract.
Yeah, I'm a team Debo over Ayuk guy, but just like style of play, aging curve, all of that, I would totally get it, which actually leads me quite nicely into something that I kind of wanted to get into from a high level, which is there's this really interesting thing going on in the NFL right now where sort of the average wide receiver prospect and the average very good wide receiver, the style of routes they're running are very different. Now, this doesn't apply to the best of the best. This does not apply to Justin Jefferson. This doesn't apply to Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, DJ Moore, who just got a 4-year, $110 million contract yesterday. Although Moore is sort of a weirdo wide receiver in the sense that he plays pretty close to the line of scrimmage a lot of the time.
Right.
And he actually looks like a running back. Like he is built more compact. I think he weighs 220 pounds, but doing NFL draft stuff and looking at a lot of the really young guys, I mean, wide receivers, especially ones that are highly paid and valued quite highly, are smaller than ever. I mean, I think the 2023 draft class is more emblematic of that than the most recent one. But like Garrett Wilson, Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith-Njigba, these guys are all shorter than 6 feet. They all had combine weights at less than 190 pounds. I mean, when I first started getting really into fantasy football, it was like a guy who weighed 190 pounds was like, you literally would not consider that guy. He would be, he would be useless to you. You wanted, I actually, this is so long ago. This is how long I've been doing this. I remember when DeAndre Hopkins was a prospect at Clemson, he was almost too small. He weighed like 210 pounds, which was kind of on the outside threshold of what you really wanted an elite wide receiver to look like. Now Hopkins would be on the larger side for both a prospect and a player. I mean, I think a big part of this is the too high safety stuff. Defenses wanting to keep you in front. It's just a lot easier to run really efficient routes closer to the line of scrimmage if you're smaller and shiftier. But sort of from a super high level, do you think that do you think that continues? Do you think it's just like a total like 3-year blip here on the radar? What are your thoughts on wide receiver size in the NFL right now?
Yeah, I think it's a really good topic to bring up. When I looked at the correlation between certain combine events or kind of what gets measured at the combine, and then how many receiving yards per season you have on your rookie contract. Like I found things like vertical and shuttle like correlated, okay with future NFL performance, but like height and weight had virtually zero correlation with performance in the league, which does make sense based on a lot of the things that you talked about. Like, I think that the league has shifted to a situation where lighter and smaller receivers can get away with, playing out full seasons and being really efficient, because of that, because of all the rule changes and kind of how the scheme has shifted in their favor. Like, I think the motion, like you talked about, is a huge thing of not having these receivers have to beat press coverage off the line of scrimmage against corners that are heavier than them, like getting them moving right before the snap is really helpful. Some of the rules around defensive tackling, I think has really like helped these smaller receivers stay healthier. And then also just like their speed and ability to either force themselves into situations where they're not taking massive hits straight on or even get out of bounds more often than bigger and slower receivers, I think has also helped them. So, it'll be a good test for someone like Tank Dell and Zay Flowers, like those types of receivers, to see if they can sustain multiple seasons of healthy play. And I think that, if they are able to do that, it'll be kind of like a sign of where things could be heading with these receivers that can play out of the slot and be used on motions to be able to be really effective in those roles.
That actually, there's another rule change that I haven't even thought of, which is like the defenseless receiver rules are so different. There is, when I was growing up watching football, like, teams really didn't throw over the middle of the field all that often. And if they did throw over the middle of the field, it was to tight ends, guys who were bigger than the guys covering them, or it was the wide receiver was in full knowledge they were going to get smoked when they caught the ball. Now, I mean, you're watching Red Zone on Sunday, you're watching Sunday Night Football, quarterback drops back to pass, and the guy catching the ball over the middle of the field, no one's within 3 yards of him. He's running completely free, and he can't be, you can't spear a wide receiver to the ground that heavy. And, it's just a lot easier to be Tank Dell. It's a lot easier to be Xavier Worthy right now because the penalty for being that small is so much lower. Another thing that is huge, I think this will be one of the most discussed things for real real ball knowers, real fantasy football heads, is going to be the cheat motion stuff, is going to be guys moving across the line of scrimmage before it starts, being in motion as the ball is snapped. I mean, it's so evident why that works. Like, watch 3 minutes of any CFL game and see how hard it is for these guys to be covered when they're literally in motion as the ball is snapped. Like, you have such a head start. And, you know, it's just easier for, like, Tyreek Hill. I mean, he's like a total freak and doesn't really have an analog in the NFL right now. But it's just so much easier for him to change direction than it is for DJ Shark to change direction, because he's got so much less momentum. And as teams have had to devise new ways to get the ball in space, and the space is not, you know, there's no space behind the defense, you want a guy who can change direction like that.
Right. I think that's exactly what it is. And like, I mean, the CFL point is huge. Like, I was surprised that, this wasn't more popular earlier, is to really get players just moving before the snap, because not only are you stretching the defense horizontally and vertically throughout the play with how they're having to follow the motion players or change their coverage rules because of it, but also just like, the point you brought up with, the receivers know what they're going to do when they're about to change direction, and giving them that head start kind of really helps with getting them open. And I think that's been such a big thing for the Dolphins offense, being able to marry the pass and the run with the types of motions that they're doing. Like, I think you have massive seasons from Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert because you have Tyreek Hill going in motion and the entire defense shifting their coverage to one side, and you can run to the other side. Like, there's so many different things you can do with it, even if you're not passing. And then when you add in the passing game element and the cheat motion, it can really take your offense to another level.
And, teams that are, I've mentioned this on shows before, but the gap between the haves and the have-nots in the NFL is actually going to keep getting wider, as there are teams that continue to play, Cro-Magnon football versus the teams that are on the absolute bleeding edge. I mean, it's not to say, like, someone like Arthur Smith actually definitely Arthur Smith has gotten a very bad rap because fantasy football managers hate him. But I mean, Arthur Smith did create a number one efficiency yards per play offense with Ryan Tannehill as his quarterback. Like, he's not bad, but I mean, we have seen how south things went for him when Atlanta, because there definitely is amongst some of the older-ish generation of guys where it's like, I'm lining my guys up, we're beating you one-on-one. I've got the best running back, the best offensive line, and we are when we win our assignments, we're gonna beat you. There's nothing that you can do. And I think, kind of the McDaniel, KOC, Andy Reid, Shanahan thing is, I don't even want to put my guys in a position to beat you one-on-one. I actually would prefer to put my guys at a real advantage. The team I am most concerned about this with in 2024 is the New England Patriots. I am very, very worried about my large adult son, Drake May, either not playing because the team is so bad, or being forced into action and just being like, all right, Drake, Javon Baker's going to try and win this route. Jalen Polk's going to try and win this route. Kendrick Bourne's going to try and win this route. And you better get the ball in quick, because we also have the worst offensive line in the NFL. I'm extremely concerned about that for him.
Yeah, I know, I'm with you on the Patriots there. I think it's gonna be tough for Drake May if he ends up starting to have success. But hopefully the Javon Baker training camp highlights that he's been putting out continues to the actual season. But the point that you bring up there is like a reason why I'm like really bullish on the Eagles this year, and especially like the Eagles offense, is because like they used no motion last year. They didn't use, they weren't giving themselves an advantage on most plays. And like, I mean, especially from watching like Lincoln Riley, like Oklahoma offenses, like college football is all about getting, wide open guys, like 1-on-0 situations. And the Eagles offense was like, we just want our offensive line to block and AJ Brown, Devontae Smith to win one-on-ones or even against double coverage. Like, there was nothing going on with, moving Devontae Smith into the slot right before the snap. And I think that there's going to be a lot more of that this year with Kellen Moore as the play caller. And I think we're going to see a bump to the Eagles offense because of that.
Kellen Moore is, if there was a comeback coach of the year award, which there is not, Kellen Moore would be the odds-on favorite for it. leaves Dallas after, kind of being actually similar to what we were just talking about with Lou Amorano, absolute toast of the town, getting head coaching interviews. He was, I remember before the Peyton thing, the Broncos were really heavily linked to him. Like multiple teams have wanted him.
Mm-hmm.
Goes to the Chargers. The offense is like pretty fine actually in Los Angeles. It was Brandon Staley's defense that was just absolutely horrendous. Like, and the Chargers, they always have terrible health. So the whole coaching staff gets fired. Kellen Moore's stock is so low that he can't interview for any of these head coaching jobs, ends up taking the OC job for Philadelphia. I mean, that is going to reverse itself very quickly. We are going to be back to Kellen Moore as a head coaching candidate very soon. I think I don't know. Some guys just get it. And I don't even know what you would call the Kellen Moore style. I don't think it's the same thing as the West Coast offense. Obviously it has those elements, but he likes to push the ball down the field a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Like I think the increase in motion, the aggressiveness, having an answer for cover zero blitzes, which the Eagles just did not have one last year, despite seeing a ton of it. Like I think all of that stuff is going to be better for them in Philly. So I'm excited to see how that plays out for sure.
Okay, you and I we had a Twitter interaction last week that I really wanted to expand upon. I posted this Jamal Charles highlight video, and I feel that we are now losing recipes in the sense that a lot of people who are relatively new. I mean, even like last 5 years or so. If you're a 21-year-old right now, you really might not know about Jamal Charles. His last like really efficient season was in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jamal Charles is probably the best running back in the NFL ever. I think Barry Sanders and Adrian Peterson and LaDainian Tomlinson are some of the other candidates. But that his 2009 season in particular, I mean, it just would be almost impossible to explain how unbelievable he was. Do you think that he is the best running back ever?
I mean, in my lifetime, I definitely think he's the best running back, that I've seen. I'm 23, so I started watching football 2007, 2008. Started playing fantasy like a year after that. So I remember like him being such a big deal in that 2009 season in fantasy, and just like every time you had a random game on, like there was some highlight reel play that he was making where he was taking either a catch or a run to like 60 yards to the house, and like. You look at any of the efficiency numbers, especially once you adjust for context, which is like what we call our rushing yards over expected. And like he'll rank number one in those, based on a pretty decent sample. Like I think injuries probably held him back from having like a much longer career, but just the pure efficiency on a per down basis, like he is the running back that you would want to have out there. Adrian Peterson has an argument, especially just what he did coming off the torn ACL. One of the more impressive seasons ever. I think that Nick Chubb is the best pure rusher of my lifetime, but the receiving work wasn't there, right? So you can't really put him in the in the top running back group, and it seems like like older running backs I like know of, but like haven't like really like studied, like Barry Sanders, Emmitt Smith, like they seem to have arguments, but I think like from a pure efficiency standpoint, Jamal Charles is the best running back.
It was kind of one of those you had to be there moments, I think, too. Like, and this is definitely what people say about Barry Sanders, which is before my time. I know Barry Sanders as a legend, not as an actual player. I just pulled up single seasons PPR points of all time. I expected Jamal Charles to be up there. Jamal Charles 27th is the highest he got in single season PPR points. And LaDainian Tomlinson in 2006 had 481 PPR points. I mean, it's the most insane thing. I mean, over 30 PPR points per game. Marshall Faulk had a 32. He only played 14 games in the year 2000. 32.8 PPR points per game. I mean, truly, we really, fantasy football the way it exists now, it is it's way worse, right? It is like the three-way backfields and having to like care about Roshan Johnson and Khalil Herbert and DeAndre Swift all for the Chicago Bears. Like I really do, because when I started playing, it was more like you took a running back in the first round, you took a running back in the second round, and if you didn't do that, you were like absolutely dusted off because running backs scored that much. So it is, I mean, obviously it's better for the real NFL to play this way, and I've enjoyed the product being more pass heavy, but there is something that I miss a little bit about that, about being like, I'm going to turn on this Cowboys game and Marion Barber and Julius Jones are going to get the ball 42 times. Like it is a little bit different.
No, for sure. Like, I mean, especially like, I think 2018 was probably the last year when like this still held true. Like, if you had a Todd Gurley, a Melvin Gordon, Ezekiel Elliott, like that type of running back, you knew you were guaranteed like a certain amount of points, depending on your league scoring. Just because, like you mentioned, like they were going to get 20 carries a game, they were going to get a touchdown. And now it's like you have like these goal line backs, you have like more of your late down backs, like a Zach Moss type. Like, there's so many things that you have to account for when you're drafting with running backs now. And I think best ball, which I just got into last year, but was probably ahead of the curve in terms of like taking wide receivers earlier now. And I think like home leagues are coming around to that, with the ADPs this year being like 4 receivers after Christian McCaffrey is taken 101. So it's definitely really interesting now to see, the difference between how these backfields played out versus like what it was just like 5-6 years ago.
For sure. All right, let's get to something that I'm trying to find the answer for. I think this is helpful for fantasy. I think this is helpful for betting, but I am just kind of fascinated with the idea of what is going to be the new big offensive trend. I mean, we've had years where 2021 was the RPO year. 2022, the thing I remember is the 2 high safety apocalypse. I don't really know what the offensive trend of last year would have been. I suppose pass rate over expectation being the highest it's ever been, while scoring also coincidingly went down. I'm very curious what your thought is on what, so some of the biggest offensive trends in 2024 might be.
Yeah, so the one that I think that we could see a lot more of this year, and I think this is going to be Sean McVay leading the way, but also a lot of other teams in the league doing this, is pistol formation. I think is going to increase a lot. And some of the reasons for this is, again, you go back to college, which is usually a couple years ahead with offensive innovation, and colleges love to use pistol formation. I think a big reason of that is it helps you really blend your run and your pass game together and not give a strong tell of what you're going to do. And I think that when you made the investment like the Rams did in your offensive guards, I think there are teams around the league that made investments in the offensive guard position this year. Playing out a pistol formation really allows you to have your running back going downhill behind that interior offensive line, but also being able to do things like play action and really getting your quarterback on the move if that is something that I think about. Bryce Young in Carolina, Kyler Murray in Arizona. Like, these are quarterbacks that can operate out of pistol because of what they did in college. And also their size is going to want to put them on the move. So I think we're going to see a lot more pistol formation this year in the league.
I love that. You know, what's so funny is one of the biggest progenitors of the pistol formation in the NFL. It's probably the last guy you would ever expect. Peyton Manning in his later years loved the pistol. And you think about it and you're like, okay, why would that have made sense? I mean, the first is it allows 2 running backs to be very close to him so that he can tell them exactly what to do, because obviously Peyton was such a control freak at the line of scrimmage. He'd be like, all right, listen, no Sean Moreno, you need to do this. Fullback, you need to do this to cover the pass protections. But it also, I mean, it does allow you to do such multifaceted things. It's a great run formation, and assuming that one of the guys who is back there with you, or I mean, you can do pistol single back as well, assuming that guy is a strong pass catcher, it allows you, I mean, you can do tons of things in the screen game. And anyone who has been big on NCAA 25, I don't know how many of you guys out there have succumbed to that. Pistol formation, super overpowered. There, you get a lot of great looks out of a lot of great looks out of the run game. There, you could do the RPO. And I mean, actually, while we're here, I want to get your thoughts on Arizona in 2024. You mentioned Kyler Murray. I think they are a total sleeping giant. Every year we get teams that go worst to first, teams that are terrible the year before, win the division the next year. The Cardinals might be my number one pick for that right now. I know that division is insanely competitive. I think all 4 teams in that division are probably quite strong. I actually think we could see all 4 teams from that division make the playoffs, given the NFC East is so weak. The NFC South is like the worst division in football. I'm super bullish. Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey McBride, Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, Kyler Murray, Trey Benson, James. I mean, that is like an insanely talented offense. I suppose the question is, last year's sample for the Cardinals, it's like, what do we learn from that? What do we learn from a season where Josh Dobbs started 9 games, Colt McCoy took all the starter reps and then was traded for a conditional pick 2 weeks before the season started? Kyler comes back and is playing 10 months removed from an ACL surgery. I'm just super high on them. I suppose I don't know a ton about the offensive play calling staff, because the sample is not that large, but feels like Kyler is like, he's got a crazy season in his range of outcomes.
I'm totally with you there. I've really been all over the Cardinals offense, since the season has ended. And I felt similarly about like the Browns defense last year, because they going into last season, because they played well at the end of the season. They brought in a ton of reinforcements through the draft, through free agency. And if you kind of just like look at the R-Lads page, you're like, yeah, this is a good roster with a good coordinator. And that's like how I feel about the Cardinals offense right now, where you have both tackle spots shored up, bringing in Jonah Williams through free agency. You mentioned the weapons, like Marvin Harrison Jr. is someone who is ready to have close to 1,000-yard receiving season. That's just like in his median outcome, just because of how high level of a prospect he is. Zay Jones comes over as a free agent. I think Trey McBride is one of the better tight ends in the NFL right now. And James Conner is one of the better running backs if he can stay healthy. And so Cardinals offense with Kyler Murray ranked 10th in EPA per play, and that's with him coming off an injury and still getting
Isn't that
used
insane?
to the offense.
Like that awful Arizona team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Exactly. Yeah, and like so full off season of Kyler in that offense, like I think they could be really good.
I hope so. I mean, that is one of my biggest priors right now in football, is that having a quarterback that can move just enough. I think Mahomes is a great example of this, and Goff is kind of the inverse example of this. Like Ethan Sherwood-Strauss wrote this piece the other day about 4th down conversions, basically. And Mahomes is one of the all-time GOATs at 4th down conversions. I mean, obviously, as you would expect, but he kind of does it in a way that you wouldn't expect. No one would say Mahomes is a running quarterback, right? Mm-hmm. No one would. I mean, he's mobile and he can scramble, but no one would say he's a running quarterback. But he is super efficient on 3rd and longs and on 4th downs at converting via his legs, whereas Goff is, I believe Goff had 21 rushing yards total last season. And Stafford too. Phillip Rivers, a good example of this. Like lots of these guys, their stats are way worse than you would think on like 4th and 5 or longer, because they can't buy themselves time to get outside of the pocket, and they can't like watching Phillip Rivers try and scramble for a 1st down. It's like one of the most hilarious things I can possibly imagine. And Kyler is just set up so well to do that on 3rd and 4th down. I think I actually think that's an element of Purdy's game that maybe we should talk about a little bit more. Is like Purdy, very similar, not a running quarterback, but his numbers on 3rd and 4th down are better than you would expect, because he can scramble a little bit. He can get outside of the pocket a little bit. And Kyler obviously is like, he's like the final form of that, because Kyler actually, controversial hot take buried 45 minutes into the show, a better passer than Lamar Jackson. Now, Lamar's like a better overall quarterback because he makes better decisions, and he is probably the best rushing quarterback since Michael Vick. But if Kyler just puts it all together for one season, the decision making, the ability to get outside of the pocket, he's got a real superstar wide receiver for the first time since Hopkins was first traded there before the suspension. Like, man, I really think they could be cooking something special there.
Yeah. No, I mean, we saw Kyler put it all together the first 8-9 weeks of 2022. Where he, like, if the season ended at that point, he would have been the MVP of the league. And that was with Cliff Kingsbury as his play caller. So, you get a little bit of an upgrade here with Drew Petzing. And I do agree with you. Like, I think there's those 3 buckets that quarterbacks fall into, like mobile quarterbacks quarterbacks who can move and then quarterbacks who don't move or kind of pocket passers. And so, yeah, like Mahomes is in that second bucket. He's definitely a quarterback who can move, but like Kyler being a pure mobile quarterback who can throw a great ball, like you mentioned, like we'll have, really good completions downfield. Like that makes me excited for what this Cardinals offense can be.
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. And maybe the Cardinals are the answer to this question, but let's end it right here. Your favorite thing for the upcoming, I mean, this could be a preseason thing to monitor too, but for the upcoming 2024 NFL season that you feel, quote unquote, no one is talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that more people should be talking about right now is just like the tail outcomes for the Titans is insane. Like I think like they could be a team that is picking number one overall next year, or they could even be a team that makes the playoffs and wins a playoff game, because we still don't know exactly what Will Levis is. Like he's probably bad, but you never know. You bring in Calvin Ridley to pair with DeAndre Hopkins. You're going to get a bump on your offensive line because of the coaching and the draft capital that was devoted to that. And then you trade for L'Jarius Sneed. You kind of have this shift with your defense going from Mike Vrabel. Like there's so much uncertainty on both sides of the ball there. Like if they ended up with the number one overall pick, I wouldn't be shocked. If they ended up as a wild card team, I also wouldn't be surprised. And I just feel like I haven't seen a ton of talk on the Titans beside like who Will Levis is dating. And so I'm very curious to see how this season actually plays out for them.
So that's fairly interesting. I mean, the nerds are a little woke to it, but the Titans are sort of speed running what the nerds have been asking for a long time, which is get a quarterback prospect, see a little bit of promise, and just try and figure out like immediately if he's got it or not. And also testing the hypothesis of, okay, you hire this great head coach, the Callahan family. They've been a really good NFL coaches for like, I think his dad has been in the NFL since the late 80s. So a long time, a lot of experience in the NFL. And look, we can argue all day. Calvin Ridley, like DeAndre, like they're both very good. I mean, they're not bad. Tyler Boyd, not a plus NFL player at this stage of his career, but better than Nick Westbrook-Akine or like whoever else they would have been running out. They signed the two like identical running backs. So Spears and Pollard are like totally interchangeable. That's something that nerds have been asking teams to do forever, which is like, don't forecast what type of play you're about to run with which running back is on the field, and talk all offseason about we want to move the ball. We want to put the ball in the air. They let go of Derrick Henry. I think that's pretty clear indication of the direction they're heading. And yeah, it's sort of like the Titans are like kind of like a thought experiment, right? It's like a toy game of like what happens when a middling quarterback prospect gets given the keys to the kingdom and they say, what can you do? I'm super excited about it, and I hope it goes well. I hope the Titans are like a really fun 7-win team or something like that. And it's like the worst outcome is like Levis just stinks and is throwing like more interceptions than touchdowns, and the coaching staff has to go conservative. I really don't want that to happen.
Yeah, no, I hope it's kind of similar to Sam Howell last year, where they're like, we're just going to drop back a ton and we're just going to let our quarterback air it out, and like kind of whatever outcomes end up happening, like we're just going to live with it because we're okay with whatever kind of end of the distribution we end up in. So I do think that they're gonna provide some fun games this year where there could be some shootouts, there could be games that swing because of explosive passes and pick sixes. Like it'll be really interesting.
It definitely will be. All right, Tej, let's go ahead and get out of here. Do you have anything you'd like to direct the people to? Do you want to talk a little bit about your work at Penn and tell people where they can be playing?
Yeah, I can't talk a ton about what I'm actually working on at Penn, but
Very, very important stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think I can mention this on here, but I am bringing back Stats and Scheme with my friend Sean Syed this year. We have our first episode coming out Thursday, so be sure to check that out if that's of any interest to you. And you can also find me on Twitter at TEJFB Analytics.
All right, there we go. Everyone, make sure that you are following Mr. Tej. He's got some of the best analysis that you're going to find in season, totally in his spare time, just dunking on all the people and letting you know what's going on in a meaningful way in the NFL. Thank you very much for listening, everyone, and we will be back